And now everything starts working. So for a little bit, the audio was not there. Hopefully now everyone can see me and hear me well. That's why we always test technical things at the start. Now we can ready to start the lesson, huh? I told you guys that I have to check if you can hear me first, right? All right. Okay, so we're going to start at the start. Perhaps a little bit of the story and history behind this opening. And at first we're going to explore the more classical lines. There are quite a few variations that I want to dive into. Perhaps it's fair to say that it's the most complex opening in chess. There are so many variations, so many lines, and I feel like every chess player has to know the basics and the fundamentals of this gorgeous opening, even if you're one d4 and one c4 player, because as you know, ideas in one opening are transitioning to the other openings, and so eventually you will want to know the basics of all of them. Hello Tudor, hello everyone who is just joining. I think it's fair to start now, and let's make the moves on the board. E4, E5. Let's welcome the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish game. Knight to F3, Knight to C6, and we have Bishop B5. So this is the point where Ruy Lopez starts. Perhaps, as I said, the earliest, or one of the earliest openings in chess that we have. We know that people hundreds, 400, 500 years ago were using this opening. Even the first move, E4, makes sense, as we're very fast with the kingside development, and as we all know, king safety is the most important element in chess, so kingside development makes the king faster to castle. And perhaps the most fundamental idea of this move, bishop to b5, is to get more control over the square of e5. So perhaps the basic of the basic is that we're trying at some point, perhaps under good conditions, to move away the knight. This would be, or to capture the knight, this would be called an exchange variation, and then apply the pressure on the black's center. There are many ways how black can play here. We're going to today look at two main lines, a6 and also the so-called Berlin variation with the knight to f6. Now, those of you who have never seen Ruy Lopez before, I doubt there are such people, but perhaps someone like I did as well. I started with the opening 1d4 as a beginner, and it took me years actually to start looking at e4. And they might be questioning something that is obvious to most of you who play Ruy Lopez. Why cannot white just win the pawn by capturing the knight and subsequently taking the pawn on e5? So the basic tactic is that after bishop takes c6, black can take with the pawn, and of course after knight takes e5 there are many double attacks, but one of them is queen d4, one black is double attacking the knight on e5 and the pawn on e4, and so black gets the pawn back plus has a good position. So however, that doesn't mean that taking on c6 doesn't have any kind of advantages. Good night, Surya. Apologies for all of you if I cannot pronounce your name properly. My bad. I should at some point learn more of Asian names and how to pronounce them. Good evening to all of you. So taking on c6 is one of the moves. It's called the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, but it aims not to win the pawn on e5. So I'll be asking you guys if any of you can help me out and tell me what's the main idea for white in this exchange variation. Why at all would white be taking on c6 and giving up a bishop for a knight? What's the main idea in this opening? Good night, Popovich. I'm so happy that there are people from all over the place. This one, I'm pretty sure I pronounced correctly. Let me know, right? Popovich, right? That sounds European. As a Lithuanian, know that there are many battles in basketball between our countries. And so Serbian names are very easy for me to pronounce, as I know many basketball players from Serbia. All right, so regarding the opening, some of you guessed one idea, the others pointed out the correct answer. And the most fundamental idea of whites is to really just to create the majority on the king side of 4 versus 3. Let me illustrate that. There is an odd move d4, which we're going to see in the game. We're going to follow a very famous game, Lasker versus Capablanca. Nowadays, people tend to castle, where we'll take a look at that as well. But let's just make the moves on the board. d4, takes, queen takes d4, and knight takes d4. And we have a pawn structure where we have 4. Let me highlight those squares. Here we go, 4 versus 3 on the king side, which promises us good prospect of creating a pass pawn on the king side in the endgame. So black is not able to respond with similar ideas on the queen side because his pawns are doubled. So at a very fundamental level, white has higher chances of getting a pass pawn, and so that's his main idea. Although black has huge compensation, one of them is the bishop pair. Also, black will be able to put a solid position in the center and control it well, and this is super solid for black as well. Now, before we dive into this old game that is must-know game, absolutely, let's take a look at nowadays theory. And after castles here, white is first castling and then playing d4. Black has a couple of options, but I just want to make a move f6. And this is the main move in this position, or one of the main moves in this position. And who told you not to ever touch the f-pawn, right? Now, I like to always teach my students this way, that I'm explaining them why certain move is good or bad in a certain situation, so that later they would know both the principle and the exception. It is true that most of the times touching the f-pawn is not a good idea in the e4, e5 openings, but here we have an exception. Yes. So the point is this, that white doesn't have the light square bishop. And so by weakening these light squares around the king, black has absolutely no worries, because he's going to put the light square bishop on e6. So because the bishop is coming to e6, and those light square weaknesses that black has created with the pawn move to f6 will be covered, white, on the other hand, doesn't have the light square bishop to damage those or weaken those squares even further. Black is absolutely fine. However, more interesting move as well would be bishop to g4, which creates a very interesting variation here that is possible for black. It's natural to want to kick the bishop out with h3, and now black has an amazing idea, which those players of the Ruy Lopez of course know, but those who don't enjoy the move h5. Yes, so I see that most of you even say the move h5 before I put it on the board. Very nice that we have Ruy Lopez players in the chat. So the basic idea is that we cannot take because we're gonna get almost mated here. The knight cannot move because queen h4 and queen h1 is going to be mate. And so black is going to regain the piece by taking on f3, and this is already bad for white. Now, an easy way for us to get out of this, since we're more aiming this opening repertoire from the white's perspective, although I don't advocate for exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, I'm just showing you variations, showing you cards, and you will be the one that will take the decision which variation to play. But we play d3, and black is going to increase the pressure on the f3 knight, and here I recommend the move bishop e3, the most simplest. Now, the point is this, that I'm threatening knight d2 with a perfect development when you cannot do anything. The other line was, of course, knight bd2, which is even slightly perhaps more popular. But now the bishop stays on c1. With bishop to e3, if black wants, well, easy quality, perhaps, at least that's what most of the people play, they just go for an AND game. So they're relieving the tension, and we have this bam, bam, bam AND game, which I think is slightly more comfortable to play with white if you know your plans. So white is threatening here to play f4 to undouble their pawns. So that's an idea you must be aware of as well for white if you want to play the exchange variation. And after bishop d6, we're simply gonna play knight d2. We have cool square on c4 that is waiting for us. And after knight e7, a move that is not very intuitive. We play rook f to b1 with ideas of playing b4, b5, a4, and trying to open up the files for our rooks. So this is one of the plans that I would recommend, and you're getting out of all those messy variations that could arise if we play knight bd2 here, right? So perhaps this could be our repertoire over here. Now let's go back, and I want to show you the game of the exchange variation, if that's what you want to play. Again, castling is the go-to move in the main line, but why don't we look at the endgame and see what is happening after white is playing d4. We have Lasker versus Capablanca here. Takes, 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 bishop to d6. Black is controlling the center, controlling the e5 square. That's where, in general, later perhaps white wants to create a pass pawn, right? Since the e pawn is the one that is the so-called candidate pass pawn, black doesn't have the e pawn. Perhaps that's where he will want to push. And as we learned a minute ago, white's main plan in the endgame is going to be creating a pass pawn on the king side, which black is not able to respond to on the queen side because of the doubled pawns. If your opponent has a bishop pair, it's almost always a good idea to exchange of the bishops. So if everything is status quo, all other things are equal, white would be happy to exchange the dark square bishops. So we have knight to c3 on the board, knight to e7, castles, and now Capablanca decided to castle. Hello, someone is asking, maybe you were, if they were missing the videos, maybe perhaps, but I'm welcoming you, and I hope I will do my best today to teach you about the Rui, and I will be waiting for you on the next video of mine as well. Please don't be shy, everyone. Use me as your chess coach today. Ask anything related to chess. I would also appreciate a lot if you could put a like on this video. That really means a lot to me, and then it means that what I do matters for you. So one of the most popular, just say, moves that of course black would also play in these structures would be c5, with the idea of creating this c6 square for the knight. Now, where to retreat the knight is the question for white. So just remember this idea that if you can, knight e2 followed by bishop f4 is a good idea for white. If your opponent has a bishop pair, exchange one of the bishops. It's a little bit more comfortable already to play for white than it was a moment ago. Black is absolutely fine, white is fine. I think that both players are nearly find it equal, but of course white still has this long-term plan of creating a pass pawn on the king side. So in the game Kappa castled, white plays f4 and creates this so-called mobile center already. Mobile center has potential to move. In the middle game with queens on the board, we would want to push, create space advantage, restrict opponent's pieces, and follow that up with a kingside attack. Whereas really in the endgame, it's just to create a pass pawn. So for example, if the pawn is on f6, we push, takes, takes, voila, we have a pass pawn, and that's this another strength of the mobile pawns. Thank you for everyone who is saying hello everyone, and someone is saying that I was helping them with the London system. Thank you very much. It means a world to me if I can improve your chess. I'm very happy and I'm very satisfied with this compliment. Thank you very much. So in this game we had Capablanca playing rook e8. Really, there are a couple of ways how to play against the mobile center as black, and in general, even if you're white. But you want to attack it or and undermine it or and block it. So basically, playing on the flank against the mobile pawns almost never work. Like really, that's a terrible idea in any kind of mobile pawn structure. Black needs to put pressure on e4 or try to undermine it by exchanging the pawns or blocking the white center pretty much. So rook e8 makes sense. Now we had knight to b3. Be careful about ideas like e5. You're advancing the pawns but creating a lot of weak squares. So after bishop b4, say knight e4, knight f5, already these pawns are blocked. Black has good grip on e6, f5 pawns. Pawns on f, e6, f5 squares. The pawns are really blocked and we don't have much of the movement. Black is absolutely fine. This is a perfect example of how to go wrong with the mobile pawns. You don't have any benefits out of it, or they don't outweigh the negatives. So we had knight b3, f6, and now black wants to play knight g6, so that whenever white plays f5, knight could comfortably block the position on e5. And here, white, Emanuel Lasker, the world champion, played a huge move that shocked the world, because it has nothing to do with the main plan of this exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez, which is really just, as I mentioned, creating a majority of the pawns on the king side and creating a pass pawn and drilling it slowly this endgame. So white played the move f5. Let's questioning that move. Let's question that. What are the benefits and the negatives out of that move? So let me pinpoint first the benefits. So A, first of all, perhaps not the most important, but we're taking away the square on g6 from the knight, right? 2, we're creating an outpost on e6 so that, let's say at some point, we could be placing the knight on e6. Please take a note, e4 is the backward pawn, so ideally perhaps black would want the bishop on b7 so that he could target this e4 weakness, right? So then we have this, at some point, maybe idea knight d4, knight d6. Third, white cannot play bishop f4. Exchanging the bishop is almost always a good idea if your opponent has a bishop pair. And so these are main benefits. Negatives, we get e5 square as black. The question is how fast and if the knight can get there. Of course, maybe there are ways, but how fast and in which variation, right? Lasker thought that the benefits outweighed the negatives. So we had bishop, pawn to b6 here, by Capablanca, bishop to f4. So Lasker understood that rule more than 100 years ago, before all of us were born. To exchange the bishop is a good idea. And the world champion, the great talent, one of the most talented players of all time, didn't have the access to all the information today. And we're good only because we have learned from those previous chess gods. But Kappa made a mistake here. And Capablanca played a move that, at least to my student, seems to be the most natural. He played bishop to b7. Why would I not want white to take here as black if I'm undoubling my pawns, is the question, right? Well, because the d6 pawn, first of all, is going to be weak, right? I'm going to play rook d1, it's going to be backward, and if you can't get d5, that pawn is going to be a weakness, right? Now, if I take, for example, instead, rook takes, and I play c5, now, the e4 pawn is weak, the rook on f4 is misplaced, it's really awkward. Black is going to put the bishop on b7, play knight c6, knight e5, and maybe, if the center is blocked, we could already pursue a queenside majority attack to restrict the pieces even further. So, these are the thoughts, and this was the conclusion after the analysis. However, Capablanca played bishop to b7. So now we had takes, and the pawn on d6 is backward, right? So now we can apply pressure on it. Not only that, perhaps the other benefit that I should pinpoint of this, that our knight now cannot go to e6, right? Because c5 pawn is here. Bishop b7 next, and that's really good. In the game, bishop b7. Takes, bishop b7. I have to click on it. Okay, bishop takes d6, takes, and now we have knight d4. So not only d6 pawn, you undouble that, but it's weak, right? Is going to be under attack, but also knight is getting to e6. So rook a to d8, knight e6, and this position is already bad for Mr. Capablanca. I'm welcoming all the questions about the position. If you have about the opening or any kind of chess-related questions, I will be thankful if all of those who just came to the chat would put a like as well on this video. Thank you very much. That means a lot to me. And perhaps we can continue with this amazing game that is one of the most famous games of all time. And we're going to see a classical play based on one rule that I don't want to just mention because it would spoil the answer. I will want to give you an exercise very soon. So for now, let's just enjoy how Emanuel Lasker gets the advantage by creating initiative against the d6 pawn. As you see already, the knights have to be passive. Knight c8, not good. Rook f2 just piling up versus d6, very easy game. b5, rook fd2, rook d7. Again, I like the next move of white's a lot. b4, just making sure we fix the pawns on the light squares. Bishop on b7 is not good. No dreams of playing a5, c5s. For now, king to f7. White is just improving the position and improving the position, and now he says, I dominate the center. So I want to teach you perhaps the most important principle in chess, at least when it comes to middle game strategy. What do we do, dear citizens of Earth, when we have an advantage in the center? What should be the white plan here? What do we do when we have advantage in the center already? We dominate the center. Exactly. So 2, 3, many people are correct. When you have dominance over the center or center is blocked, we move the play to the flank. So here white is absolutely dominating the center. Like, look at their pieces around the center, right? So now white just goes g4 and kingside attack, right? So perhaps we could play moves like later without allowing, just don't allow any breaks, right? Counterplay, because if you switch everything to the king side, please take control of the center as well. Don't allow counterplay there. But if we can, right, something like g5, I mean, opening it up with ideas of placing rook on g7 should be a kill. So we can just now see how white attacks on the king side, moves the play to there, and pretty much Capablanca had no chance to stop it. So Lasker opens up the H file, moves the rooks there, and now makes another gorgeous, marvelous move. E5, getting the knight to e4. Oh dear, what is going on, right? Just perfect pieces. Rooks are an open file, penetrating to the 7. Knight e6, knight e4. Perfect squares for the knight. Game is over, basically, right? And Kappa soon resigned. So this is the classical game in this Ruy Lopez variation. Now, more of Ruy Lopez, right? Now, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5. So now in this part of the video, or the stream, we will be viewing at perhaps nowadays the main defense as black against Ruy Lopez. It wasn't so popular back in the day. It was popularized by Mr. Vladimir Kramnik, the great world champion from Russia, who beat Garry Kasparov in the world championship match and became the world champion, and this was a defense that he used against e4. So the Berlin defense. Now, it is famous for an endgame. Of course, nowadays people also play a variation called anti-Berlin. So let's explore that. White castles, and black takes the pawn on e4 just because they can. And here white decides to open up the position as black grabbed that pawn, and it is time to open things up as long as the black's king is in the middle. So why black didn't play a6. So that now after knight d6, the bishop would get hit. You could imagine that if, say, a6, bishop a4 were included, knight couldn't go to d6 and hit the bishop, and now white would have an alternative move, like, say, takes on e5 and with a good position. So here, white takes on c6, black takes on c6, d takes e5, again, very forced line. Knight pretty much has to go to f5. If knight e4, white can keep the queens on the board. And here, middle game is just better for white. Rook on d1, black's king is in the middle. We have space advantage with the pawn e5. Development is good. So black goes knight f5. And here we have this endgame of the Berlin. The most famous endgame, perhaps, that arise out of the openings. The question is Berlin bad for beginners? Every beginner, I believe, is different, and there are many opinions, and I just find that there is no good answer with regards to which opening is good for a beginner, which opening is bad for beginners. So when I teach beginners, of course, I give them a solid repertoire, and it depends if you want short-term success or long-term success. So if a student wants good results in the next 2 months, you can teach them more weird sidelines. Like, for example, with white, you can teach them pseudo-Catalan, same London, for example, and they get good solid positions with white. With black, you can also teach them more easier openings to play. Or if you go for long-term results, if you have a kid that really wants to be serious about chess, and you want to grow a champion, then in the long term, we can already start learning main lines. So why don't we play e4, e5, or e4, c5, and or d4 as white? In the short term, yes, they're very hard, and people might be losing the games because there are traps and all that. But in the long term, after a year, your whole understanding, position understanding of chess, because boost and is far better than those who play those simple openings. It's just because the openings are far more rich. And I also hold an opinion that every 200 rating points a player must introduce into his repertoire a new opening. So if, say, you're 1200, I teach you an opening for white, opening for black. After 200 rating points, once you become, I said 1200, so when you become 1400, one new opening for white or variation, one new opening for black. So that when you get to like 2200, you could play against e4 like 2 systems, 3 openings already with couple of variations. So you could play e5, French, and say Sicilian, right? Not to the same level, but right, some maybe weirder lines in some of the openings, right? Because you don't want to be playing one opening whole your life. That was, I hope, comprehensive answer to that question. So what is going on in this endgame, right? And let's just get the fundamentals here. So first of all, let's say white's advantages and black's advantages. 1, white has a healthy pawn majority on the king side and chances to create a pass pawn. So 1, 2, 3, right? Same as exchange French. And black is not able to respond with the same. So if I take all the pieces away except the kings, white is winning, right? Or at least it should be like that, right? So white can create a pass pawn. Now 2, and this is the most important perhaps, black's king is misplaced and doesn't allow the rooks to be connected easily. So the real problem in the Berlin for black is just not that the king itself is weak, but that the king is misplaced. So now the third advantage for white would be that white leads the development, right? So white is gonna go first out of the back rank, and so we could say that moves like knight c3, rook d1 starts leading the development for white. Perhaps the pawn on e5 gives us space advantage as well. Now black's advantages. Now we should mention that black has a bishop pair. Although black always wants to exchange the dark square bishop on one of the opponent's knights. Because if say I would exchange the dark square bishop for the opponent's knight on say b1, I could set up a blockade on the light squares on the king side. So remember that majority that I said we want to create a pass pawn, right? If one of the knights gets exchanged, I could easily put the pawn on g6 and have these light squares under my control, and it's almost impossible to create a pass pawn, or it's very hard to do so on the king side. So we always want to exchange the dark square bishop for the knight. Also, we would love to play any kind of endgame as black against this bishop. So don't allow easily to swap this knight of yours if you're playing white for the dark square bishop. Now, e5 pawn, another problem for white is that e5 pawn is weak, and it is really a burden more than an asset. It really hangs a lot of the times, and it blocks the dark square bishop. The more pawn goes back actually here, the better white is, okay, on any of these squares. So if I put the pawn on e2, this endgame is much better for white. Because then I can play bishop f4, I have good diagonal, perhaps the pawn should really go to e4, and so e5 pawn is not the best one here. So let's take a look at a couple of games over here. And all of you who just came, again, I would appreciate if you can put a like on this video. Thank you so much for showing in the chat and asking questions. I appreciate that a lot, my friends. So let's take a look at a game how white won, and then we will also look at the game how black won. So we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop to b5, and Berlin. So d4, knight takes e4, castles, a little bit weirder move order. People castle here more commonly. So we have, because d4 allows these all sort of knight takes d4s, so it just white messed up a little bit with the move order, but we're still getting to the Berlin. By the way, we're seeing a game from Kestony, grandmaster from Russia, against another very strong female player, Ambar Tsumova. So knight takes e4, castles, all what we have seen before. Takes on c6. Now there was a question, why can't we take b takes c6? This position is just very good for white. So we play rook e1, just we lead the development. We have huge space advantage with the pawn on e5. Your king is not going to be safe on the king side because I restrict already your pieces there. Not so easy for black to either undermine as well the pawn on e5 without having any kind of problems, and so this is just considered very, very strong for white. So we're getting to the Berlin. King takes, queen takes, king takes, and now we have rook d1. Usually people play knight c3. It's the most universal move that doesn't show off any cards, but although I think rook d1 is the most natural, we're just putting the rook on the open file. Yes, everyone who is a little bit late, you can always watch the video afterwards. It's gonna be on Chess24. Don't you worry, all right? I'm referring to Aniket. By the way, thank you so much for letting me know. So king to e8, knight to c3, bishop to e7, and slowly we're gonna see the main plans of whites of creating this majority on the king side. So how does the game look like if things go well for white? So knight to e4, just centralizing the knight. Tempi don't matter perhaps so much in such more of a closed positions. h6, not at like just covering g5 at some point, especially if bishop comes to e6. Maybe at some point, if bishop wasn't on e7, we could play knight g5. Remember that black wants to exchange the dark square bishop for the knight. Don't do that as white. Don't allow dark square bishop exchange for any of your knights, because black will set up a huge blockade on these light squares and you won't get a pass pawn, or it's gonna be hard. So we have b3. Most of the time bishop goes to b2. You will have to protect the pawn on e5. It's gonna be a little bit hanging a lot of the times. Bishop to e6, bishop to b2, and rook to d8. Now, those of you who might question if we can take as white, I think that after taking, we're helping black as where he can place now the king on c8, and so black solved main problem of theirs, which is just the misplaced king. And now I don't even think we need the rook on d8 because rook is already good on the perhaps the h file if we push the pawns, but of course we could consider it at some point as well. So we have h3 slowly preparing ideas with g4. She will want to push the pawn majorities. b6, and we have pawn to c4. So usually the best pawn structure in the Berlin for black would be with on the queen side with the pawns on the dark squares. You want to make the light square bishop a monster, and the ideal placement for the king would be on c6. So if you could achieve that, that pawn structure and king on c6, you're perfect. But of course c5 sometimes weaken this d5 square, and that's why white plays this c4. They want to have a grip on that square. So a5, g4, majority starts rolling, knight to h4, knights could be exchanged, no worries there, and f4. So here, like, majority starts rolling, and that pass pawn is going to be created. So Kestony plays it very well. So already say if g6, trying to stop the ideas of f5, we could swap the rooks, and then play rook f1 with the next move f5, and majority starts rolling. So in the game we had bishop to c8, little bit passive, and white played a gorgeous move e6. So making sense of this diagonal and taking attacking g7. So black pretty much has to play something like king f8. And now white plays an amazing move. I enjoyed it so much, the move g5. So the point is that the bishop is closed and no longer defends the pawn on d8. Hello Shuvo, nice to see you here again. Thank you very much for coming. And so the bishop is no longer defending this d8 rook. So that forces the rook either to take or to move away. And now amazing move, knight to f6. What is happening, right? So the idea is that when it happened, that after takes, we have bishop to f6 and we're threatening e7. So that's not good. e7, rook d8, mamma mia, right? What is happening? Kestony is playing so well. So we had rook h7, e7, and black had to take. And then with the finishing kill, rook d8, rook e8, rook d1, and soon mate is about to come. So king is already in the box. So in the game we had bishop d7, rook d7, and white won. So this is what happens when things go good for white. Now let's take a look at the game where things are going bad for black, for white. So this is going to be the Berlin. Let's look at it perhaps from black's point of view, because it's important to know your opening from both colors. So if you play Berlin for white, if you're e4 player and you play Ruy Lopez, you have to know the basic ideas for black as well. So let's reach the Berlin via normal move order this time. And this time we play knight c3 as white. So black is going to demolish white here. The player with the black pieces is very talented Dutch player, Erwil El Ami. I'm pretty sure my pronunciation was terrible. Apologies again. Not very good with the names. And black here plays knight e7. So a very weird looking move. But the point of this move is to get the knight to g6 and apply pressure on e5. So this make sure that the white knight for now has to stay on f3, and so it makes it hard for white to achieve his main plan, which is just to push the majority, right? So we place the knight on g6, h3, knight g6, and now this knight for now cannot move and allow f4. So knight to e4, and black plays h6. So now if we play bishop to e6, the problem is that you cannot lose that light square bishop. Knight to g5 is gonna come, and so we're gonna have problems. Like, you cannot lose the light square bishop in the Berlin, or that's the principle. Not all the time again, but you want to preserve it. That's your bet piece, and you always want to exchange the dark square bishop for the knight, right? So if you can, dark square bishop, swap it whenever you can, as white don't allow that. So black plays h6. We have b3 as white, and now c5. So because the knight is now on e4 and not on c3, c5, weakening the d5 square, has no drawbacks. If the knight was, say, on c3, it could jump to d5 now. And remember, on the queen side, c6 is not what you want to play. Your placement of the pawns is on the dark squares, with ideally the king on c6. Alright, so white plays c4, bishop to e6, bishop to b2, and king to d7. So the king is just coming to c6, where it's most comfortable. Rook to d1, king to c6, knight c3 trying to fight for d5, bishop to e7, knight to d5, and now a5. So basically, if white takes on e7, we know that they cannot exchange the dark square bishop of blacks. That's always a very good idea for black. So we're not hesitating to prevent that. Knight h2, perhaps white wants to go for their main plan of pushing on the king side. Rook h to d8, exchanging the dark square bishop, what we had, what we shouldn't do. a4, playing on the queen side, already pawns are a little bit weaker, bishop to f5, and already white is getting completely outplayed. There is no harmony in white's pieces, they're all over the place, majority hasn't been pushed. Black got everything he wanted. He maintained the light square bishop, he achieved his perfect setup with, say, okay, pawn could go to b6, on the dark squares on the queen side, king is on c6, rooks are connected, rooks are playing, and this is just terrible thing, position for white. So they tried even e6, black didn't take it. I guess the idea is that they're opening up the bishop and attack on g7. So f6, rook d1, and white just resigned. So this is how things could go very good for black, and as you can see, Berlin could be played for the win as well. For those who just came, I would appreciate if you can put a like on this video. Thank you very much. And we can pursue with new ideas. And now I want to show you a different type of Ruy Lopez, which is going to be the closed one. Let me find number 8. And here we have a structure of the closed Ruy Lopez. Perhaps we can show you how we get there as well. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and another move that black can play, which is the main line, a6. So this is already not the Berlin territory. Bishop to a4, knight to f6, and white is willing to leave that pawn over there. If black was to take here, we'd call this open Spanish, and white will be able to get the pawn back with ideas similarly with d4 and rook e1. So the main line of the Ruy Lopez goes with bishop to e7, rook to e1. Now white is defending the pawn on e4, b5, bishop to b3, d6, c3. White always goes for his main ideas with d4, and if whenever we can, we're gonna go for d4. Hello Jafar, hello Kakalari, if I pronounce that well. Welcome everyone, nice to see you again. How are you guys? We're exploring the Ruy Lopez, the closed variation right now. So black castles, white plays h3 to prevent bishop g4, and in these positions, black has many moves to choose from. There are a couple of variations that they could go for. There are basically 3 main lines in the Ruy Lopez. And those are knight a5, bishop b7, and just the classical knight b8. Don't know exactly which are classical one, but all of these has drawbacks and has benefits to it. Perhaps the move to a5 prepares pawn move to c5. If we have time, we're going to explore on that. The move knight to b8 prepares a solid knight bd7 when black will be able to apply the pressure on e4. Knight is not gonna be in the bishop's way, and black can also play the pawn to c5. And perhaps the other variation would be bishop to b7, directly applying the pressure on e4. So I hope we can look at all of these, but we'll see how time allows us that. So the question is why they play b5 instead of castles. Perhaps it's important to note that whenever white defends the pawn on e4, with any way, queen e2 or pawn to d3, they're already threatening to win the pawn on e5. So for example, castles, takes, and you don't have any tactics because these already, okay, the pawn on e4 is protected. So you'd have no way to win it back. So basically, whenever white defends the pawn, say queen e2, you play b5 and d6, right? So that they wouldn't have that tactic, or d3, right? So again, b5 or and d6. Because if you don't, then you're going to be losing a pawn over there. Hopefully that answers the question. Hello, Raunak. Thank you very much for stopping by. Nice to see you too. Dear people, please ask any kind of chess-related questions. Use me as your chess coach. I will gladly stop and answer the most important ones. So I want to just show you the main idea in the Ruy Lopez, or one of the main ideas. It's going to be related to the knight maneuver, which all of you who played this opening are familiar with, but others might be not. And it's the idea of bringing the knight to g3. So knight d2, knight f1, knight g3 is very common. The idea is to support the pawn on e4, and also sometimes peek at the square of f5 in case the bishop is on b7. And this is one of the reasons why black a lot of the times places the pawn on the square on g6. So we're going to see a very interesting game in similar variation. Let me find game 10. It's going to be Robert James Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky in 1992 when they played the rematch. So Bobby wasn't playing the chess for 20 years, Bobby Fischer, of course, and he played one of the most brilliant games that anyone has ever played. So we have e4, e5. Let's go from the start. All of these moves that we looked at before. If you have questions, please stop and don't hesitate to ask. So all the moves were already explored. b5, bishop b3, and I'm gonna show another idea that is very common in these lines. c3, white wants to break with d4. By the way, c3 also leaves the spot for the bishop to go to c2, because knight e5, you don't want to lose the Ruy bishop. Don't lose the Ruy Lopez bishop, right? The bishop that is the light square is very important to us. So castles, h3, stopping bishop g4, an important inclusion, and black goes knight b8. A weird looking move, but it has a lot of benefits. The main idea is to get the knight to d7, and black is trying to put the bishop now on the b7 square, where we're gonna apply the pressure on the e4 pawn. This wasn't possible with the knight on c6. White, on the other hand, rushes with this maneuver of getting the knight to g3 and fulfilling his opening dream of protecting e4 like that, and perhaps even aiming at the f5 square. So knight bd2, bishop to b7, and for now we're preventing knight f1, knight g3 because e4 is hanging. So now Mr. Ruy bishop has to go to c2, which is a small win for black maybe, right? And then we can play knight f1, knight g3. So now black plays rook e8, already indirectly, right? Staring at that pawn on e4. So white plays knight f1, bishop to f8. Which variation of the Ruy Lopez is best for white? Sasmith is asking us a question. There is no best variation, good or bad. Everyone is choosing the variation that they understand the most, or that the variation would fit their style. The way I would do, if I was your coach, is I would show you all of the variations in Ruy Lopez, like 3 main lines, and then I would show you games and explain you the main ideas behind it. And then you would be telling me which one do you like the most, what is your feeling for it and would fit your style, or which has the most clear plans according to you. So if one player if one variation fits one player better, then others might be playing King's Gambit all the time, right? Because they have like very fighting character and they're chaotic in their lives. I remember Gary used to say that our natural real-life character resembles our character as a chess player as well. So if you're very calm as a chess player, then you're supposed to be calm also in the chess game. But I would ask then, what about Steinitz, who was almost in the wheelchair? Maybe they didn't have wheelchairs at that time, I don't know, but had very bad health. But how did he play on the board? He was attacking, he wasn't backing down at all. But perhaps it has nothing to do with his character, just that physical health was not the best, right? So, thanks Samuel for question. The question is why white wouldn't be playing d5 after bishop to b7. Let's go there. So I have to say that in general, d5 is a structure that we want to go for as white, especially if the pawn is on c5. Now, the reason why we sometimes are resistant to the idea of d5 in these situations, because there is a very common pawn break, c6. And that's why black didn't play c5, right? So this is perfect now situation for black to be playing that. And now black gets good control over d5. And he's gonna play knight c5, apply the pressure on e4, that's going to be huge. Plus, if he gets d5, he should be even better, right? So the problem and how to evaluate this position is first, who claims the d5 square, how much of a pressure there is on e4, and if black can play d5. So thank you for the question. I hope that answers Samuel Smith. And I'm welcoming everyone to ask questions and also put a like on the video. You wouldn't believe how much I care about that. That really shows me that you enjoyed the lesson. So this is the reason, I guess, why d5 is not played so early, right? However, after the pawn on c5, if we play d5, did not have that same break, right, Samuel? So Bobby Fischer versus Pasky here, knight f1, bishop f8, knight g3, and because the bishop is already not here, we're kind of threatening to go f5, even after like a move like g6. Black isn't really weakening the dark square so severely because the dark square bishop is simply there. So black just plays this as a prophylaxis, taking away the f5 square, and white goes bishop g5, developing a piece. White in this situation, hello Pavan Kumar, nice to see you here. So white in this position really would love to play queen d2 and bishop h6 and follow that up with a kingside attack if you could, right? So black plays like skips a move. Let's just skip a move for black, although it's very hard to do it here, right? Bishop h6 would be one of the ideas. Not the sorry, not here. Queen d2 first, right? And then bishop h6 is one of the ideas that white would want to do. So black doesn't allow any dreams of that. h6, bishop comes back to d2 so that the pawn would still be overprotected and the e-file would be still open to the rook, or semi-opened. Okay, it's closed, but rooks, I guess, doesn't want to be blocked. Because black can always open it up and there is going to be a huge pressure on e4. So that's something that we have to overprotect. So bishop to g7, solidifying the king side. And now I'm going to show you the other idea that is super important for any Rui player. One was this one, and the other one is a4. Very standard. White both applies pressure on b5, and at some point, not now, at some point, plays on the a file. So we could even sometimes triple up here behind and then open it up so that we could invade the a7 track. You're welcome, Sukhrit Das. Thank you for your compliment. Someone is asking how to improve the rating. Well, I think there is no shortcut. It's just doing a little bit of everything. So it means tactics, strategy, and game analysis, all of those components, right? It is a package of things that one has to do to get to 1500. I would ask you this in order to answer your question. How did you get to 1400, right? So maybe doing the same things but more efficiently or better, or just doing same things, and perhaps we could make you a 1500 already, right? Because you were doing some things that brought you to that rating already. So now we played c5, and Samuel, just see what white does now. Black plays c5, and now we play d5, right? So he doesn't have that break c6 anymore. We know you're 2100, you're very high rated, but I don't know your name. But thank you very much for being in all of our streams and so active. You're a very strong player. So here black plays c4, which the main idea is that we can get the knight to c5 and apply the pressure on e4. So white plays b4, typical idea, taking away the c5 square. Now we have knight to h7. So perhaps this move is a little bit awkward, but black at some point would want to go maybe for ideas of pawn breaks, pawn pushes on the king side. Somehow f5, h5, h4, right? Because if white is playing already with a4 on the queen side, right? And the center is blocked, the only place for black to play is on the king side, right? Do opening matter for lowering the 2000? So Saul is asking. I think that opening matters at all stages, but perhaps when you're a beginner, then it more matters to play the opening well than to know the opening theory. But openings do matter at every point. It's just that opening theory starts mattering more as you climb, but it matters since you're LO1, right? So yes. So we have bishop to e3, very nice move that aims at these diagonals. This diagonal now, we don't have to unblock the rook on e1 to overprotect e4. e4 is not hanging to us at all. And now Spassky plays h5, queen d2 developing, rook f8. And here comes what I wanted to show you, right? Why a4 is so cool. Bobby is going to show us why. Bobby Fischer, of course, or Robert James Fischer. Rook a3, white is trying to triple or double on the a file and then open it up. So ideal, queen a2, rook a1, swap, and then we can get the rook to a7. And that's power, right? So the point of open file is so that we could invade the 7th or any other dangerous ranks, right? For all of you who just joined, if you can and enjoy the video, please put a like on the video. Thank you very much. There is a question by Anna. Why doesn't black take en passant after b4? That is a very interesting question, and the answer is that they do take. So this is the main line. Spassky was the one who did not take. So we would have something like, I imagine, knight to c5, and we could maybe solidify the center as white with c4, slight pressure on b5, but this is the go-to move for black. So your idea is a grandmaster idea, Anna. Congratulations. So we had rook a3 on the board, knight d to f6, and just doubling up on the a file. So not only that, Bobby is tripling up. And I guess black just didn't find a convincing way at some point to push the pawns on the king side. He just didn't see anything going there well. So with queen e8 and all of these moves, what black really is aiming for is overprotecting a8, so that after open up of the a file, this rook wouldn't be lost. Why not bishop h6? I guess because white is already playing on the a file right now. Although Bobby is going to transition to the king side as well, Ruy Lopez is one of the openings where we're playing on all parts of the boards, but I guess for now Bobby is focusing on the a file. Plus, sometimes you have this idea of temporary blocking the file if you cannot win it, and placing the bishop on a7 and doubling, tripling behind it, but now you already doubled, so you don't need that. And I think that in general, this bishop is good and this bishop is bad. So unless we follow up bishop h6 with a kingside attack, then there is no point in exchanging them. So we have knight f1, which is genius idea. He wants to open it up, then bring the knight where it aims at b5. Ridiculous, right? Genius Bobby Fischer. So bishop to e7, knight d2, king g7, knight b1. Now imagine black keeps waiting. Watch this, right? So we open it up, right? We take, and knight a3 win the pawn and win the game. So what a genius idea, like bringing back the knight in a close position from g3. So at first it went d2, f1, g3, then it went back, f1, d2, g1, right? So here, Spassky took on e4, bishop takes e4, f5 with forks, bishop to c2, trying to create counterplay, getting 2 pawns for the piece right now. And Bobby just didn't have it. Rook a7 and went to win the game. So already this position, I think, is enough to explain you the idea of the, or a couple of ideas that are very popular in the Ruy Lopez, and the rest is just a good middle game lesson that we could have. But since today's topic is the Ruy Lopez, it's fair to end here. Thank you very much. We didn't have enough time to watch the open Ruy Lopez, but I'm sure that you can analyze some of it on your own. I have to thank you for such a big audience that was so active today. I hope to see you on Friday. Please come. I will be streaming the French defense. Pauper opening for black. Let's learn together. I really enjoy preparing for these streams. I know that so many of you also come here and ask me questions. It's really a pleasure to be working with you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate for all the likes that you put on this video. That means really a world to me. Thank you very much. And see you on Friday, all right, my friends? Stay healthy, stay safe, and continue loving the game. I'm saying goodbye for